most comforting lie about power is that it changes people. It is comforting because it lets everyone stay innocent. When a quiet man becomes cruel after he gets promoted, people say the position changed him. When a humble woman becomes vain after she becomes admired, people say attention poisoned her. When a friend becomes distant after he gets money, people say success got to his head. That explanation is easy to live with. It keeps the darkness outside the person. It puts the blame on the crown, the office, the applause, the wealth, the room full of people who suddenly say yes. It allows us to believe that before power arrived, the person was clean, and after power arrived, something foreign entered him. Machiavelli would not have been so kind. He would have watched the man before the promotion, not after it. He would have listened to the jokes he made when nobody important was in the room. He would have studied the way he spoke to people who could not help him. He would have noticed the small irritation behind his politeness, the hunger under his humility, the careful way he smiled when he needed approval. And when the man finally received power and became cruel, Machiavelli would not be surprised. He would only say that the mask had become unnecessary. Power does not corrupt you. It removes the pressure that once forced you to look civilized. It removes the fear of being rejected, the need to be liked, the danger of being corrected, the dependence on people beneath you. What appears after that is not always a new person. Sometimes it is the person who had been waiting for permission. There was a man named Adrian who learned this too late. Before anyone called him powerful, Adrian looked almost harmless. He was polite, observant, patient, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. In meetings, he took notes while louder people fought for attention. At dinners, he remembered names. When someone interrupted him, he smiled instead of reacting. People liked him because he seemed controlled. They trusted him because he never appeared hungry. But hunger does not disappear just because it has manners. Adrian had spent most of his life below people who were less intelligent than him. At least, that was how he described it to himself. He had watched managers make sloppy decisions, watched confident people receive credit for average ideas, watched charming fools move faster than careful thinkers. He told himself he was not resentful. He told himself he simply understood things more clearly. That was the first lie. The second lie was that if he ever gained authority, he would use it better than they did. He would be fair. He would be precise. He would never become one of those small men who needed power to feel tall. For years, this belief made him feel morally superior. He was not like them. He was patient because he was mature. He was quiet because he was disciplined. He was humble because he had perspective. Then, one winter, the company collapsed into crisis. A director left suddenly. Two senior managers blamed each other. A major client threatened to walk. The board needed someone calm enough to restore order and invisible enough not to frighten anyone. Adrian was chosen as interim director. The announcement was small. A short email, a few congratulations, a temporary title that might become permanent if he performed well. Nothing dramatic happened that day. That is how power often enters, not like thunder, like a key sliding quietly into a lock. At first, Adrian behaved exactly as people expected. He stayed late. He reorganized broken systems. He answered messages with terrifying speed. He made everyone feel that, finally, an adult had entered the room. Even the people who had once ignored him began asking for his opinion. He enjoyed that more than he admitted. Not the work, not the responsibility, the reversal. People who used to speak over him now waited for him to finish. People who once dismissed his concerns now nodded carefully when he raised an eyebrow. People who had treated him as useful now treated him as necessary. He told himself he was not enjoying obedience. He was enjoying efficiency. That was the third lie. A month later, an analyst named Daniel challenged one of Adrian's decisions during a planning call. Daniel was young, nervous, and correct. The timeline Adrian had approved was too aggressive. The team would miss hidden dependencies. The client would notice. Daniel explained this carefully. Adrian listened without interrupting. Everyone saw his calm face. No one saw what happened beneath it. The correction touched something old. It touched every year Adrian had spent being unheard. It touched every meeting where he had been right and ignored. It touched the private courtroom in his mind, where he had already convicted everyone else of stupidity. He thanked Daniel for the input and moved on. After the call, he reassigned Daniel to a smaller project. There was no explosion, no insult, no obvious punishment. Adrian even wrote that Daniel's attention to detail would be valuable elsewhere. It looked reasonable, it looked strategic, it looked clean, but Adrian knew. For 1 second, before he dressed the decision in professional language, he had felt the pleasure of removing someone who made him feel exposed. That second was the beginning. Not because the act was enormous, it was not. People are rarely revealed by their biggest sins first. They are revealed by the small permissions they give themselves while still believing they are good. Before power, Adrian had imagined that morality would feel like a grand choice, a line in the sand, a dramatic moment when he would either stand with principle or fall into corruption. Instead, it felt like scheduling. A calendar update. A new reporting structure. A sentence written carefully enough to hide the motive underneath. And that is the first dark lesson. Power does not ask who you claim to be. It watches what you do when your motive can hide inside a reasonable explanation. So, before we go further, hold one question in your mind. Not for the comments, not for anyone else, but for the part of you that still tells the truth when nobody is listening. If you had the power to remove someone who made you feel small, and everyone would call it leadership, what would you do? Adrian did not think of himself as cruel. Cruel people enjoyed pain. Cruel people shouted, threatened, humiliated, and demanded loyalty with open hands. Adrian did none of that. He spoke softly. He chose words carefully. He never raised his voice in public. This made his conscience easy to manage. Most people do not recognize their own darkness because it arrives in a respectable form. Control arrives as standards. Revenge arrives as accountability. Fear arrives as caution. Vanity arrives as protecting the mission. Selfishness arrives dressed as self-respect. Adrian was especially skilled at this. He could take almost any impulse and make it sound clean. When he excluded someone from a meeting, it was focus. When he delayed a response, it was prioritization. When he withheld context, it was strategic timing. When he praised one employee in front of another, knowing exactly how it would create competition, it was motivation. He never said, even to himself, "I am learning how to move people." He said, "I am learning how to lead." This is why Machiavelli still disturbs people after centuries. Not because he invented evil. Evil did not need him. He is disturbing because he looked at human behavior without worshiping the stories people tell about themselves. He understood that men often speak of virtue while protecting interest. They speak of honor while defending image. They speak of loyalty while calculating safety. They speak of justice while measuring advantage. He did not ask what people claimed to value when nothing was at stake. He watched what they protected when pressure arrived. Adrian had always claimed to value truth. That claim survived easily when truth cost him nothing. He liked honest people. He admired direct conversations. He believed teams needed transparency. He had even criticized past leaders for hiding bad news until it was too late. In his private mythology, he was the kind of man who could face reality. Then reality became expensive. 6 weeks into his temporary role, the client project began to fail. Not visibly, not yet, but in the numbers. Hours were rising. Delivery was slipping. The timeline Daniel had questioned was beginning to crack exactly where Daniel said it would. Adrian saw it first. For an hour, he sat alone in his office, staring at a dashboard that told him the truth. He could have gathered the team and admitted the timeline was wrong. He could have restored Daniel to the project. He could have told the client they needed to adjust the plan. But each option had a price. Admitting the timeline was wrong would make him look less certain. Bringing Daniel back would make the reassignment look like punishment. Telling the client would risk the permanent role he had started imagining as already his. So Adrian chose a smaller truth. He told the team there were execution issues. He said the strategy was sound, but discipline had slipped. He asked for tighter reporting, shorter check-ins, cleaner ownership. The words were not completely false. That made them more useful. A clean lie is fragile. A partial truth is stronger. The team absorbed the pressure. People worked later. Nobody complained openly. Daniel heard about the new reporting structure from a coworker and said nothing. Adrian noticed the silence and felt relief. Then he made the most dangerous mistake a powerful person can make. He mistook silence for agreement. At home that night, he poured a drink and told himself he had done the hard thing. Leadership required difficult calls. Weak leaders confessed every uncertainty and spread panic. Strong leaders absorbed complexity and gave people direction. This sounded noble. It also protected him from the fact that he had hidden the one truth that threatened his image. That is how untested morality fails. Not in theory, in trade. You discover the price of your principle, and then you decide whether you still believe in it. Everyone values honesty until honesty costs status. Everyone values fairness until fairness costs advantage. Everyone values humility until humility costs admiration. Everyone values loyalty until betrayal becomes profitable and deniable. Adrian had not become a liar because power corrupted him. Power had simply presented a situation where lying could protect something he wanted. The desire was already there. The fear was already there. The image he wanted to defend was already there. Power only made the choice available. And this is where many people misunderstand themselves. They believe they are moral because they have not crossed certain lines. But some lines are only meaningful when you have the ability to cross them. A person without options can look loyal. A person without leverage can look gentle. A person without influence can look modest. A person who cannot punish anyone can look forgiving. Virtue without opportunity is not proof. It is only an untested claim. A week later, Adrian passed Daniel in the hallway. Daniel nodded politely. There was no anger in his face, only distance. That bothered Adrian more than anger would have. Anger would have made Daniel seem immature. Distance made him seem observant. Adrian stopped walking. "You've been quiet," he said. Daniel looked at him for a moment. "I assumed you preferred that." There was no accusation in the sentence. That made it worse. Adrian smiled, a small, controlled smile. "I prefer useful input." Daniel answered carefully. "Then I hope useful input remains safe." For the first time since taking the role, Adrian felt seen, not exposed publicly, not challenged in a meeting, seen in the private place where motive lives before language cleans it up. He could have paused. He could have asked what Daniel meant. He could have let the discomfort become information. Instead, he chose dignity. "Noted," Adrian said. Then he walked away. Later, he would remember that moment as a fork in the road. Not because Daniel had the power to stop him. Daniel had almost none. That was exactly why the moment mattered. The test of character is not how you treat someone who can punish you. It is how you treat someone who can only tell the truth and hope you are still human enough to hear it. Adrian did not hear it. He only heard a subordinate, forgetting his place. And somewhere inside him, a door opened. The permanent appointment came at the end of March. By then, Adrian had fixed enough visible problems to look indispensable. The client stayed. The board was satisfied. The team was exhausted, but exhaustion rarely appears in executive summaries. At the announcement meeting, people applauded. Adrian stood at the front of the room with his hands folded, accepting the praise with practiced restraint. He thanked the team. He sounded generous because generosity was useful in public. Across the room, Daniel clapped once, then stopped. Adrian noticed. His attention had become selective and suspicious. Before, he had watched rooms because he wanted to understand them. Now he watched rooms to detect disloyalty. A late reply, a flat expression, a missing smile, a question asked with the wrong tone. All of it began to feel like information. Seeing clearly had become a kind of power. But the danger of seeing clearly is that you begin to believe your interpretation is reality itself. Adrian could read people better than most. That was true. He noticed hesitation. He noticed envy. He noticed when people agreed too quickly. He noticed who wanted approval, who feared conflict, who needed recognition, who hid insecurity behind jokes. This made him effective. It also made him less kind, because once you can see the strings, you are tempted to pull them. He began with small adjustments. He praised Maya, the most ambitious manager, in front of her peers, because he knew praise made her work harder. He gave Oliver vague criticism because uncertainty made Oliver chase approval. He shared partial information with 2 department leads separately, knowing each would reveal something different in response. He called this organizational intelligence. And perhaps some of it was. Leadership does require awareness. People are not machines. But there is a line between understanding people and using their wounds as handles. Adrian crossed it quietly. The more he understood people, the less patience he had for them. Their motives looked obvious to him. Their excuses sounded rehearsed. Their fears seemed childish. When someone came into his office with a problem, he often knew the real issue before they finished the first sentence. At first, this made him helpful. Then it made him bored. Then it made him contemptuous. Contempt is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like efficiency. You stop explaining because explanation feels wasted. You stop listening because you already know what the person is going to say. You stop being curious because your first interpretation is usually close enough. Eventually, people become predictable objects moving through your strategy. That was when Adrian began to lose something more valuable than kindness. He began to lose contact with reality. Not because he was stupid, because he was sharp. A dull mind gets corrected by the world constantly. A sharp mind can defend itself from correction for a long time. It can explain away evidence. It can win arguments that should have humbled it. It can make its blind spots sound sophisticated. She had been one of his strongest supporters, partly because he had fed her ambition with careful attention. He gave her difficult assignments, praised her discipline, and let her feel chosen. She responded exactly as he expected. She worked harder, defended him in rooms he was not in, and treated his approval like currency. Then one evening, after a client dinner, she asked to speak privately. Adrian thought she wanted reassurance about a promotion. Instead, she said, "People are afraid to disagree with you." Adrian smiled faintly. "People always say that when standards rise." "No," she said, "this is different." He looked at her more closely. Maya was nervous, but not weak. That irritated him. Fear he could manage. Courage required respect. She continued. "They don't think you'll shout. They think you'll remember. They think disagreement becomes a mark against them later." Adrian said nothing. "You ask for honesty," she said, "but you reward alignment." Adrian could feel two paths open inside him. One path led toward the discomfort. He could ask for examples. He could let her show him what he had become. He could allow the image of himself as fair, controlled, and superior to crack. He studied her face and found the motive he wanted: ambition, frustration. Maybe fear that she was not advancing quickly enough. Maybe resentment dressed as concern. Maybe she had been influenced by Daniel. Once he found a possible motive, he used it to dismiss the message. This is one of the oldest tricks of the ego. When truth arrives from an imperfect messenger, attack the imperfection and keep the lie. "I appreciate your honesty," Adrian said. Maya looked disappointed. She had heard the door close. The next morning, Adrian did nothing obvious. He did not punish her. He did not remove her. He simply stopped giving her the kind of attention that had made her powerful. He became polite, professional, distant. Within 2 weeks, Maya understood. So did everyone else. After that, disagreement became rare. Meetings became smoother. Reports became cleaner. People anticipated what Adrian wanted and gave it to him. Problems reached him later, softer, wrapped in solutions that protected his mood. He believed the organization was becoming disciplined. It was becoming silent. The silence around a powerful person is rarely empty. It is full of swallowed warnings. This is the hidden cost of seeing clearly without humility. You gain the ability to detect weakness in others, but you lose the ability to detect the moment your own strength becomes dangerous. You begin as a man who can read the room. You end as a man who has trained the room to lie to him. One night, Adrian stayed late and walked through the empty office. Rows of desks sat in blue darkness. On Daniel's old desk, someone had left a printed project note with handwritten corrections in the margin. Adrian picked it up and recognized Daniel's handwriting. The corrections were good. For a moment, he felt the old sensation of being younger, less certain, still capable of learning from a sentence that made him uncomfortable. Then his phone buzzed. A message from the board chair. "Excellent quarter. Keep pressure on the team." Adrian looked at the message, then at the paper. He folded the paper once and placed it back on the desk. The moment passed. Power had revealed another thing in him. He wanted truth, but not as much as he wanted confirmation. The collapse, when it finally came, did not look like collapse at first. It looked like success. Adrian's division hit its quarterly targets. The board expanded his authority. A profile appeared in an industry newsletter calling him a rare operator with unusual psychological precision. He read the article twice, then told himself he did not care. By summer, he was no longer only managing projects. He was shaping careers. Promotions required his approval. Budgets moved through his office. People changed how they spoke when he entered a room. Conversations became cleaner, warmer, more careful. Power had become atmosphere. That is when the final mask began to loosen. A junior employee named Leah requested a transfer out of Adrian's division. The request was quiet, procedural. She did not accuse anyone. She cited fit, growth, and a desire for broader experience. The language was harmless. Adrian sensed a message beneath it. Leah had worked under Maya. She had also been close to Daniel before he left the company. That was enough for Adrian to feel the old irritation, not anger. Anger would have made him seem uncontrolled. This was colder. A sense that someone beneath him had formed a private judgment and was trying to escape without paying for it. He called her into his office. Leah sat upright, hands folded, trying to appear calm. Adrian asked why she wanted to leave. She repeated the language from the request. Fit. Growth. Broader experience. He waited. Silence is a tool. Used with care, it invites truth. Used with hunger, it extracts submission. Leah eventually said, "I don't think I do my best work in this environment." Adrian nodded slowly. "What environment?" She looked at the door, then back at him. "One where people are careful all the time." There it was again, the same accusation returning through a smaller voice. A wise man would have recognized the pattern. Adrian recognized disloyalty. He leaned back. His tone remained gentle. "Careful can also mean professional." "Yes," Leah said, "but this feels different." He studied her face and understood exactly where to press. She needed to be seen as fair. She feared seeming dramatic. She did not want conflict, so he gave her a choice that was not really a choice. "If there are specific concerns," he said, "you should name them. Otherwise, vague discomfort can become unfair to the people working very hard here." Leah looked trapped. Adrian watched her struggle and felt, for one brief second, the power of it. He could make her doubt the legitimacy of her own discomfort. He could turn her silence into weakness, her caution into guilt, her fear into proof that nothing serious had happened. He did not need to threaten her. He only needed to define the room. That is one of the deepest forms of power, controlling the meaning of what happens. If someone cries, you call them unstable. If someone objects, you call them negative. If someone leaves, you call them uncommitted. If someone tells the truth too early, you call them unprofessional. The act stays the same. The label changes who gets believed. Leah apologized. Adrian accepted the apology with kindness. After she left, he denied the transfer. The official reason was timing. The division needed continuity. Her growth would be better served by finishing the current cycle. Every sentence was defensible. Every sentence was also a cage. That evening, Adrian looked at himself in the bathroom mirror before leaving the office. He looked composed, successful, not evil. That almost comforted him. Most monsters do not look like monsters to themselves. They look like people managing complexity. His phone rang. It was Daniel. Adrian almost ignored it, then answered. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps vanity, perhaps some buried desire to be stopped before the story became irreversible. Daniel did not waste time. "I heard about Leah," he said. Adrian's voice cooled. "You don't work here anymore." "No," Daniel said. "That's why I can say this. You've built a place where people don't tell you the truth until they're already leaving." Adrian walked back into his office and closed the door. "You always had a gift for dramatic framing. And you always had a gift for making punishment look procedural." The words entered cleanly. For a moment, Adrian hated him. Not because Daniel was wrong, because Daniel was close. Daniel continued. "You think power made you efficient. It made you safe from consequences. That's different." Adrian said nothing. "You were always angry," Daniel said. "You were just powerless enough to call it patience. There are sentences that do not persuade. They reveal." Adrian felt something rise in him, fast and ugly. He wanted to destroy Daniel in language, to remind him who had advanced and who had left, to turn his honesty into bitterness, to make him small enough that the truth he carried could become small too. And now he could. Not directly, perhaps. Daniel was gone. But Adrian had contacts, influence, a reputation. A sentence placed in the right ear could follow Daniel quietly for years, too rigid, difficult. Not a team player, brilliant, but immature. The possibility appeared in Adrian's mind, fully formed, and no one would know. That was the most honest moment of his life. Not the moment when he was praised, not the moment when he was attacked. The moment when he understood he could harm someone for telling the truth and probably get away with it. Power lives there. Not only in titles, but in the space between desire and consequence. In the gap where you can take more than your share, hide a fact, twist a story, wound someone who trusted you, or punish a voice that made you feel naked. Adrian stood in that gap. Daniel waited on the line. For several seconds, Adrian said nothing because two versions of him had become visible at once. One version wanted restraint. It was tired, faint, almost embarrassed by how weak it had become. The other version wanted permission. It was eloquent. It had reasons. It said Daniel was dangerous. It said leadership required protection. It said one quiet warning to the right person was not revenge, only prudence. This is how the monster speaks, not in screams, in arguments. Adrian ended the call without answering. Then he sat at his desk until the office lights turned off automatically. In the dark reflection of the window, he finally saw the thing power had been revealing all along. He had not become cruel because he gained authority. He had gained authority, and cruelty had found language. The next morning, Adrian arrived before everyone else. For the first time in months, he did not open his laptop. He sat in the office he had wanted so badly and listened to the building wake up around him. Elevators moved. Doors clicked. Coffee machines started. People entered softly, as if noise itself required permission. That sound reached him. Softness, caution. The atmosphere of people who had learned to measure themselves before speaking. He had built it. He thought about Daniel's sentence. You were always angry. You were just powerless enough to call it patience. Adrian had not been patient because he was free of anger. He had been patient because anger had no throne. He had not been humble because he did not want recognition. He had been humble because recognition had not yet turned toward him. He had not been gentle because control did not tempt him. He had been gentle because nobody had given him enough control to reveal the temptation. Realization is not redemption. Many people see themselves clearly for a moment, then use the pain of that clarity as proof that they are already changing. They confuse self-awareness with payment. But seeing the truth costs very little compared to obeying it. At 9, Adrian called Leah back into his office. She entered with the careful face he now recognized as something he had created. He told her the transfer would be approved. I also owe you an apology, he said. The sentence felt strange in his mouth, not because it was false, but because it did not protect him. Leah waited. I turned a reasonable request into a loyalty test, he said. That was wrong. He continued. If you are willing, I want you to send me the concerns you were afraid to say. Not today, not in person. Write them down. And if you would rather send them to HR instead of me, do that. Leah studied him, looking for the trap. There was no trap, or at least Adrian hoped there was no trap. He had learned enough to distrust the first noble version of his motives. After she left, he wrote to Maya, "You were right, and I made honesty unsafe." He stared at it for a long time before sending it. The old self resisted. It offered revisions, softer ones, less exposed ones. It suggested, I have been reflecting on our conversation. It suggested, some of your concerns may have merit. It suggested anything that would let him appear thoughtful without being accountable. He sent the plain sentence. Then he called the board chair and told her the division had a feedback problem created by his leadership. Saying it aloud felt like stepping out from behind glass. The chair was silent for a moment. Adrian could hear her recalculating him. Good, he thought. Let the image pay. Over the next month, Adrian did something that looked simple and felt humiliating. He invited resistance back into the room. Not symbolic resistance, real resistance. He asked specific questions and did not answer them. Where have I made honesty difficult? Which decisions are people afraid to challenge? Who has stopped speaking because of how I respond? What truth reaches me too late? At first, people gave safe answers. They had been trained well. Adrian had to prove that truth could survive contact with him. The proof was not a speech, it was repetition. Someone said something uncomfortable, and nothing bad happened. Someone contradicted him, and they were not frozen out. Someone named a pattern, and he did not translate it into disloyalty. Slowly, the room changed. Maya eventually met with him. She did not congratulate him for changing. She gave him a list of behaviors so accurate that he wanted to defend himself 3 times before she reached the bottom. Each time, he wrote instead of speaking, to hear truth without immediately turning it into a threat. Daniel never returned to the company. Adrian called him once, not to repair the relationship, because some things do not repair on command, but to say that he had been right. Daniel listened, then said, "Being right didn't help much when you had the power." Adrian accepted that. There is a childish kind of redemption that wants every apology to end in warmth. It wants the harmed person to become evidence of the powerful person's growth. But even that can become another form of control. Sometimes, the most honest apology is one that does not ask to be useful to your self-image. Years later, people would describe Adrian as a good leader. Some meant it. Some still remembered the earlier version and remained careful. Both were true. A person is not purified because he finally sees himself. He is only made responsible for what he has seen. That is the part most people avoid. They want the lesson without the debt. Machiavelli's darkest lesson is not that men are evil. That is too simple. It is that men are mixed, and power separates the mixture. It reveals the hunger inside the humility, the fear inside the virtue, the vanity inside the mission, the cruelty inside the need for order. But revelation is not destiny. Power reveals you. It does not finish you. What happens after the revelation depends on whether you defend the mask or face the face beneath it. So watch yourself in the small moments. Not only when you are praised, not only when you are attacked. Watch yourself when you can get away with something. When someone needs you more than you need them. When a person tells you a truth that makes you feel smaller. When silence would protect your image. When a beautiful excuse appears just in time to make an ugly action feel necessary. That is where the real self becomes visible. And if this story made you think of someone else, pause there. That is the easier direction. The harder question is where this lives in you. Because one day, in some form, power will come. It may not look like a throne. It may look like money, beauty, knowledge, status, love, silence, information, seniority, or the simple fact that someone is afraid to lose you. And when it comes, it will not ask what you believe. It will remove the consequences and wait. Then, quietly, it will show you the person who appears when pretending is no longer useful.